Cinema Wellman. I'm your host, David, and happy Halloween. We have a Cinema Wellman Halloween show for you today, and what we're going to do is break down Stephen King movie adaptations. We've got 10 that you must see, we've got 5 honorable mention, and we have 5 that are really the bottom of the barrel, and you should avoid at all costs. Let's go back to 1974. Stephen King is a struggling author who hadn't been published, and he is living in northern Maine with his wife Tabitha, and he is shopping around a novel titled Carrie. And Carrie is about a young girl who is bullied in school, and she possesses these telekinetic powers that she uses to seek revenge against her tormentors. So we're all familiar with the story now. But back in 1974, nobody wanted to publish it. He went to publisher after publisher after publisher, got nothing. And he came home one day frustrated and about to quit, and actually threw Carrie into the trash can. His wife Tabitha, as the story goes, fished it out of the trash can, sent it to that one more publisher who did publish it. And 2 years later, in 1976, Carrie was made into a major motion picture, and it put Stephen King on the map. And nothing's been the same since. The horror literature genre hasn't been the same. Horror films haven't been the same. And we haven't been the same since Carrie was unleashed upon us by Stephen King those many, many years ago now. This topic was suggested to me by my cousin Johnny, who gave me the idea for the top sports films as well. Thank you, Johnny, for doing that. And I knew that once Stephen King was involved in a project, I was going to have to get my Stephen King expert in, and my Stephen King expert is my good friend Andrew. Andrew has read every single Stephen King story, and we're talking, the totals are staggering. 65 novels, 11 short story compilations that feature over 200 total stories, 20 novellas, and Andrew's read all but one of the novels. And I actually got a note from him this morning that says, should I just read that? I don't know. Maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't. Let's see, you want to check that box so you could say all, but I don't know. Maybe have that one outlier just there, conversation's sake. Equally difficult to nail down are the number of film adaptations that we're talking about. Over 50, definitely over 50. 34 television series or miniseries. There were 15 Stephen King movies in the 80s. There were 17 more in the 90s. There are 15 more right now in the works. So I knew that I had to get some help with this. I had seen almost all of the Stephen King movie adaptations. I was missing about a dozen, and I saw 9 more, and a few of those made the list, believe it or not. So between Andrew reading everything and me seeing everything, I thought we'd have a couple of good brains to go forward with this project. The way we did it, Andrew and I got together and we agreed on 20 different Stephen King titles, obviously that were made into films. I had Andrew rank these 20 titles just by the written word. Forget about the movies. Andrew's job was to rank the 20 titles by the written word. I, on the other hand, my job was to rank the 20 titles, forgetting the books and just ranking the films. And what we did was I put the 2 lists together and mathematically figured it out, and that's the top 10 that you're going to get. The bottom 5, I already decided we don't want to trash the written word just because a bad film was made from it. So that was kind of separate. Andrew didn't really suggest those. I already knew the bottom 5 movies beforehand. So that's how things were done. Before we start, I do want to talk a little bit about why so many seem to miss. Now, I'm going to give you a bottom 5. There are at least 10 that are I mean, they're not trash, but they're not good. And it seems like an awful lot of Stephen King's stories, even though they are so loved by not only fans, but critics also, love his work, and yet it doesn't seem to transfer itself to good film all of the time. Now, why is that? I've got a couple ideas. First of all, the way King writes, like any good author, they create a picture in your mind, in the reader's mind, while the reader's reading it. You create. You know what characters look like. The author describes them. You build them in your mind. And with King, there's always horror. And there's always stuff that you don't want to imagine, and yet you do imagine it. So you've got your ideas from what you read. And it's kind of difficult when then that is handed to someone else, and their job is to put on film what they got out of that, their vision from their imagination. And sometimes it just doesn't transfer. The other thing is, remember, a lot of these movies were made a while ago, before the advent of CGI as we know it today. Frankly, there were so many things in Stephen King's novels that without CGI, they were impossible to create on the screen. So some of the things that you remember most vividly from the novels, you are not going to get in some of these movies. Another reason why some of these, or a lot of these, miss is that you have to look at the source material. Those 65 novels, or whatever the number was that I landed on, only 15 of those are fewer than 300 pages. And as a matter of fact, many of them are 600 to 1,000 pages, some over 1,000. So you can't take stories that large and cram them in their entirety into a 90-minute movie, a 120-minute movie. It's just not going to work. That's why 5 of the 15 that we're going to recommend that you see today are TV movies or miniseries, where they have more than the 90 minutes. They have more than the 120 minutes. Would you sit down and watch a 10-hour movie? Probably not. 8-hour movie? Probably not. Will you watch that 10-hour movie if it's cut up into 10 one-hour movies? Yeah. And that's why some of these succeeded in that, on that platform, as opposed to succeeding in a theatrical setting, just theatrical films. Okay, so that's what we have That's what we have in store for us today, and we are going to start like we always do, and we're going to start with the bottom 5. Now, the 5th film on the bottom 5 is Cujo, and Cujo is from 1983, and it's about a Saint Bernard, nice Saint Bernard, not Cujo's fault, contracts rabies, and he loses his mind because he's got rabies. And he ends up trapping a young mom and her son in a car, and the car takes place during the summer, and the car overheats, and there's no one around to help them. And remember, for the bottom 5s, I'm going to spill it. There are spoilers. In the honorable mentions in the top 10 today, no spoilers, just a little bit about why you should see it. With the bottom 5, usually I'll give everything away because you don't need to see it anyway. And if you do see it, the movie's so bad anyway, having it spoiled is not going to make that experience any worse. So I will tell you that in Cujo the novel, the boy dies. Dehydration, heat stroke, all that stuff. And he dies and mom contracts rabies. In the movie, they're both fine. They both live. You know, it's a traumatic experience, obviously, but they both survive. Now, I saw this and I was livid. I hate when movies change books' endings. Turns out that King himself regretted killing the boy in the novel, so when he saw the movie, he was pleased that the boy survived. So, King liked the new ending. Cinema Wellman did not. And that's all this is about. So there. Here we go. Number 4 on the bottom 5 list is from 1987. This, it's titled The Running Man. And The Running Man was published in 1978. Stephen King wrote a bunch of books that he published under a pseudonym, and it was Richard Bachman. And it's funny, when the Bachman books came out and people started reading them, they're saying, wow, this guy's kind of ripping off Stephen King. Turns out it's because Stephen King was writing them. Now, this story is set in a dystopian future, and if you check the movie poster, you'll see that that dystopian future was the year 2019. So I love when that happens. When you look at old sci-fi movies and you say, in this hellscape of 2004, and you know that we didn't, there's some hellscapes going on, but not to the point that these movies are showing us. This movie is actually a mess. The Running Man is about convicts being hunted on television for entertainment, and so it's a game show where people are hunted and killed. And all of it's like pro wrestling in the sense where all these characters, the killers, are all over the top. You know, they have their own shtick and all this stuff. And the game show, it's hosted by Richard Dawson, which is phenomenal. And he's awful in this. He's just awful. So we have future Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. We have future Governor Jesse Ventura. And we have future non-governor Richard Dawson starring in Running Man. Some of this is campy and kind of fun, and all of it is just junk. They're going to do another one. This happens all the time. It was bad. People know it was bad, and yet they're going to take another shot at it. Now, normally I'd pass, but I've read that it is going to be directed by Edgar Wright, who directed a couple of my favorites, Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz. So I'm going to get in that van for The Running Man. There's one more version of The Running Man that we're going to see. All right, let's move on. Here we go. Number 3, published in 1978. As a matter of fact, the bottom 3 are all from the same short story collection that was published in 1978, and that was Night Shift. And I remember reading Night Shift when it came out in 1978 and loving it. And then you see there's these 3 really bad films that were made from those short stories that I loved so much. So number 3 is The Mangler, and The Mangler takes place in modern, present day, but the Mangler centers around this industrial laundromat that has this huge laundry folding machine, the Mangler, that kills people like all the time. Every other day, it seems like someone's being not only killed, but like sucked into this machine and dismembered, and the blood just gushing out all over this place, and place stays open. No, they got Freddy Krueger himself. They got Robert Englund to play the guy who runs the laundromat. It's absurd. It's a short story that may have been a decent Twilight Zone episode, but you can't turn this into a full-length movie. You know those signs they have in workplaces that are, have feature machinery and stuff like that? 30 days since an accident. Or this place would have one that would say, 2 days since one of our employees was savagely murdered by this possessed piece of laundry folding machinery. Oh, Chet, you want to take that down? Put that back to 0. Helen got killed this morning. I mean, where's OSHA when you need them? And is there another place in town for these people to work? Would you work in a place that, hey, why are we always hiring? The people get murdered here by that machine. All right, now your first shift, you're going to go over and work with that machine. Come on, only in stories and only in horror stories, I am sure. Number 2 at the bottom. You've heard of this before because Maximum Overdrive was featured. It had a spot in the bottom 5 September screenings. As a matter of fact, I think it was the number 1 slot of the bottom 5 there. And I predicted it would show up in the Stephen King list, and it did. This is a story about one of those things that happens, and all the machines become sentient and especially vehicles. So that's why you see any posters for this. It's always a truck or something like that, and all these people are stranded at a rest stop. And I was rooting for all of them to die. I was rooting for all the trucks to win. And actually, the short story that it's based on was titled Trucks. And again, not bad for a short story. You can't turn that little bit into a 90-minute movie. You can't. Just like you can't take a 1,000-page novel and cram it into a 90-minute movie. Same thing. It misses for kind of the same reasons, even though it appears to be the opposites. This was the only film that's ever directed by Stephen King himself, who has admitted that he had no idea what he was doing, and he also admits that he was coked out of his mind for the entire shoot, barely remembers doing it. And it shows. This is garbage. Speaking of garbage, the number one in the bottom five of the Stephen King movie adaptations is from 1992. And of course, once again, from Night Shift, published in 1978. And that is The Lawnmower Man. And this short story couldn't even be made into a Twilight Zone of interest. It's just a bad story. And what they did was the studio that had control of purchased Lawnmower Man from Stephen King actually had this other script titled Cyber God. And basically what they did was they took the title and they popped it on top of Cyber God, and they took characters' names and a few things out of Lawnmower Man, and then produced and made this movie. And then you look at it and you go, hey, Stephen King movie. And then you watch it and you go, I don't recall any of this. It's because it really wasn't based on the short story Lawnmower Man, which is why it deserves to be the number one slot on this list of the bottom five. You can't take two scripts and put them together when they weren't meant to be together. And this was really funny. I just saw this. So this is one of those films that I just saw in preparation of this episode. And I remember watching it and saying, remember Tron? Remember how shitty Tron was? This is like a shitty Tron. And Tron was shitty on its own. Amazing. The CGI, the special effects are just terrible. And it's really funny that you look at this, and I had to sit and suffer through. The only version I could find was the director's cut. They made a director's cut of this, and director's cuts are usually longer, so I had to sit through this one. It was 2 hours and 21 minutes. Astounding. Everything about this was bad from start to finish. And so that's what you should avoid. Those are the five that you should avoid. All right, here we go. Now, we usually don't venture into honorable mentions, but I had to with this. And one of the reasons why was there were so many TV adaptations that needed to be included because of their quality. And I didn't want to shortchange them. And I wanted to concentrate on the theatrical films, but a bunch of these couldn't be left out, so they were included. So here are your honorable mentions for Stephen King movie adaptations. First off is from 2019, and the film is Dr. Sleep. And Dr. Sleep was published in 2013. Andrew's ranks for the honorable mentions and the top 10 you can see on the blog, which you could find at cinemawellman.com. That and other information about the publishing and the films, stuff that there's not enough room for in the episode of the podcast that seeps its way into the blog. So check out cinemawellman.com for our blog companion pieces for all the episodes if you'd like to read along. So this is something that was a sequel written by Stephen King, and that's odd for Stephen King because he usually doesn't do it. And it's the sequel to The Shining, which was one of his most popular novels. And it picks up with Danny Torrance, who was the young boy in The Shining, and now adult Danny Torrance is dealing with, he still has this power of the shine, and now he's an adult and he's helping others that are dealing with this power on a day-to-day basis. This was really good. This was good stuff. And again, if you like The Shining and you weren't aware that this was a sequel, read it and then see it. All right, here we go. Another one for honorable mention is from 2007. This was published in 1980. It was a novella that was included in Skeleton Crew, and it's titled The Mist. And The Mist is one of those films, and it's another one that I just saw this year in preparation for this episode. And I made sure that I saw this because it kept showing up on lists of underrated Stephen King movie adaptations. And I was like, oh, really? Now, I was familiar with the story. I liked the story. And when the film came out, I was like, for whatever reason, I never saw it. So I wanted to see it. And it is very, very good. It's about a man who's out one day with his son, and they get caught in this freak storm, and they seek refuge in this old-fashioned kind of grocery store. Remember the grocery stores that all glass on the front, and that's key to this whole film. So he's in there during the storm and everything. After the storm dissipates, this mist hangs out, and in the mist are these monsters, and the monsters are pretty cool. Now, there's a couple of jump scares. I'm not a big fan of that, but because of the glass and the mist and the monsters, they work. This was underrated, I thought. It's scary. It's suspenseful. You don't know what's going to happen next. It also deals with mob mentality, and sometimes mob mentality is scarier than any monster that's hiding in any mist anywhere. This also features an absolute killer ending. I remember watching this, and I rewound it. Did they really do that? Kudos. Good for them. So this is underrated, and that is The Mist. The next one is the only one on our list that's not a TV miniseries. This was a TV series that ran from 2017 to 2019. There are a total of 30, pretty much 1 hour episodes, and it's titled Mr. Mercedes. And it's about a madman who steals a Mercedes and drives it into a crowd, and then is kind of like taunting the cops. And the detective on the case is played by Brendan Gleeson, who is just superb in this. And there's great cat and mouse in this. And it's a good TV series stuff. And again, could you cram this into 90 minutes, 2 hours? No, couldn't be done. And if they tried, might have ended up on the bottom 5. And yet here it is with honorable mention. Same could be said for the next one from 2020. The Outsider, which was published in 2018. And I remember reading this and loving it. And this is a mini series, and it, again, works because they have the time to explore the depth of the characters that King creates. And this one is about a local guy who's a great guy. Everybody in town knows him. He's the baseball coach. Everyone loves him, and he is a suspect in this heinous crime. And there is all this evidence that points to him being the one who did it. And I mean, surveillance footage of him in places where he swears he wasn't, and it's definitely him. So what we have here is a shapeshifter alert, and it's creepy. And the guy is Jason Bateman, and you gotta love Jason Bateman. So it fits. He's that. Look, he couldn't have done this. Wow, this was creepy. The last honorable mention we have for you, we recommend that you see, is from 2021, and it's Lacey's Story. And Lacey's Story is a miniseries. That being said, it's a little bit more accessible. It's 8 episodes, but they're not an hour each. So the 8 episodes will run you about 6 hours and 40 minutes, which is it's more tenable than the 10-hour ones. Lacey's Story stars friend of Cinema Wellman, Maud Lebowski herself, Julianne Moore, and also friend of Cinema Wellman, Jennifer Jason Leigh. And Clive Owen plays Lacey's author husband. King does that a lot. There's a lot of stories about authors. Out of these 15, I didn't do this. I'm now doing it off the top of my head. Out of the 15, I think 6 of them might have protagonists who are authors or struggling authors or whatever. He brings that in a lot. And Lacey's Story is based on a stalker who's obsessed with Clive Owen's work, and he is stalking Lacey. It's really good. It's very it's taut. It's tense. And again, Julianne Moore see it just for her. So we're done with the fence sitting. Those were honorable mention, and those were the only reason I brought them up is because of all of them being quality, and I didn't want to leave them out of the top 10. But now is where we get into the top 10. And at the 10 spot is 11/22/63, which came out in 2016. And this was a miniseries. Now, out of the 10 in the top 10, only 2 are not theatrical movies. and this is one of them. This The novel was 849 pages, so that's some heavy lifting right there. That's not for casual readers. But when I read that Stephen King was not only writing a novel about the Kennedy assassination, he was including time travel in that. I don't get this could have been a million pages. I was going to read it. I knew I was going to love it as well. There's a love story in this that made me cry. Usually King makes me cringe or slam the book shut. I was actually driven to tears by Stephen King writing about love for another person. It was odd. It was an odd experience. This is fantastic. I'm not a big fan of James Franco, but if you are a time travel fan or you're a JFK assassination geek, boy, do I know a lot of those people, and you know who you are. This is definitely for you. This is in your wheelhouse. All right, let's move on. Number 9 on our top 10 list was published in 1982 in the book Different Seasons as a novella, and the novella was titled The Body. And the film from 1986 is titled Stand By Me. And Stand By Me is not really a horror story. It doesn't really have supernatural elements. The story is titled The Body because these 4 young friends, one summer when they're just running around, doing kid stuff, they come across this body of a young boy, a classmate who had been hit by a train. So this is that's the only part of it that's kind of creepy or gross even. Other than the pie eating scene. Get yourself a nice blueberry pie and sit down and watch Stand By Me, and you'll enjoy it even more, I think. Have a bucket handy. The cast in this, the young kids, and again, King can write kids, and he's done it over and over again, and he always does a great job with it. The number 1 movie on our list today has to do with kids in peril, and he does it. King does it so well, and the actors that they get to do these, we've got as kids, we've got Will Wheaton, Corey Feldman, Jerry O'Connell, and the late River Phoenix are the 4 young kids in this, and it's a story that every time you watch it, it's going to make you think of summer, and it's going to make you think of good friends that you had when you were a kid, and this always like a nice warm spot. The story and this film for me. Stephen King considers it one of the best adaptations of any of his stories, and Rob Reiner considers it the best movie that he's ever directed. So you really can't go wrong with those 2 bits. Let's move on to number 8. Number 8, I mentioned to you earlier in the episode, right at the top. It's Carrie, and Carrie, again, published in 74, movie in 76. And this, I watched this, so in 76, I was in 8th grade. We didn't have cable where I would have seen this until high school, so I saw this a little later. I remember watching it. Everyone else had gone to bed, and I was watching it late at night in my room with the little TV, and this scared the hell out of me, and it's probably why I didn't really want to go to any of the proms when I was in high school. So Carrie is the story of, it's the ultimate bullied beyond the breaking point story. Young Carrie White, played by Sissy Spacek, who was fantastic in this. She was nominated for an Oscar, as was Piper Laurie, who plays Carrie's mom in this. And Piper Laurie thought that she was making a comedy. That's how over the top her character is, as this religious zealot who, is so protective of her daughter, and everything is ultra religious and all this scripture and things like that. And Piper Laurie thought that it was like a goof. It was like, but she's making this horror movie that has stood the test of time, and it's up there. This is I think one of the most famous and beloved horror movies of all time. You read about movies like I do, and you come across stories. Sissy Spacek in this was a total gamer. If you look at the poster, that iconic poster has Carrie covered, in blood. Sissy Spacek, for continuity purposes, actually lived and slept in that blood-soaked prom dress for 3 days so continuity would have everything right. She also agreed to be buried alive for the ending. And I won't tell you what that ending is, but they put her in a box. And Sissy Spacek was in the box. There's no way I'm getting in that box. You couldn't give me enough money. They rebooted it in 2013. Chloe Grace Moretz was Carrie. It was okay, but if you haven't seen either, you got to see Sissy Spacek first. Directed by one of the masters of horror, I think, Brian De Palma. This is a good one. Fantastic. Can't go wrong. Number seven. Number seven's kind of a sleeper. Seven, you might, when I give you the title, you might say, yeah, I don't know that story and I don't know that movie. And it's titled Needful Things. And Needful Things is one of King's Castle Rock stories. So it takes place in Castle Rock, Maine. So it's the small town. Ed Harris is the sheriff. Bonnie Bedelia is his girlfriend. And, everybody knows each other in town. Everything's all cool, copacetic in this little town until Leland Gaunt moves in. And Leland Gaunt is played by Max von Sydow. And Leland Gaunt opens up a little curio shop in town. And it just so happens that everything that you would ever want, if you were one of those townspeople, your deepest, darkest desires, it's there at Needful Things. And Mr. Gaunt doesn't take money for any of these items. He has you do little favors for him. And these favors escalate and escalate and escalate. And this is really interesting to watch. As the poster warns, buy now, pay later. That's Needful Things. That's fantastic. And a sleeper pick. Number 6 is The Green Mile. And The Green Mile was published in 1996 in a serial format. So, and I loved this because I ate this up. I guess this is the way some things were published way back before I was born. But from March to August of 1996, we were given The Green Mile in 100-page increments. And we'd go to the bookstore and you'd buy that little paperback, thin little paperback. If you were like me, you read it in a day. And then you had to wait a month for the story to continue. No spoilers anywhere. Nobody on the interwebs telling you what happened. No advanced copies that were snuck and read and spoiled for anybody. I loved this. Okay, so this is directed by Frank Darabont, who also directed The Mist and directed the number 4 movie on this list. So he, as a director, is all over this Stephen King list. Great actors in this. Tom Hanks, Michael Jeter, Sam Rockwell. I love Sam Rockwell. He's so disgusting in this. Barry Pepper, the great Patricia Clarkson, the late Michael Clark Duncan plays the giant John Coffey, and he's the center of the story. And he is this large man who possesses these powers, healing powers. And he is wrongfully accused of a crime that he did not commit, and he is on the mile for this, awaiting execution. This is some heavy-duty stuff. It's a really good story. It's a great prison story. That might be in the future. Prison movies might be coming up next year on an episode of Cinema Wellman. Let's move on to number 5. Number 5 is the movies from 1990. Novel published in 1987. And Stephen King was so impressed by the work that Rob Reiner did with his Stand By Me that when he sold the rights to Misery, he did it under the stipulation that Rob Reiner direct the film. And that happened. And so what we have again is another Rob Reiner, Stephen King collaboration. And this one is also excellent. This is really, now Stand By Me was centered around the 4 characters. This film's really a 2-person show. Kathy Bates plays Annie Wilkes, and Kathy Bates won an Oscar for this performance. She's a huge fan of an author. We got authors in it again. And the author is Paul Sheldon, and he's played by James Caan. Paul Sheldon is out driving one winter night, and he gets in this terrible accident where he is banged up, broken bones, the whole thing. He is rescued from this car wreck by Annie Wilkes, who brings him to her house and is the Good Samaritan that is going to take care of him and nurse him back to health. Now, because of the storm, roads are closed forever. no communication in the outside world, all this stuff. So Annie really needs to be his nurse and take care of him and kind of make sure he's got everything that he needs while he's recovering. It's all a nice Good Samaritan story until Annie starts to show signs of being something other than that kind soul, other than that Good Samaritan. This is tremendous. And another one that doesn't have things like vampires or ghosts or haunted sentient objects or haunted this or haunted that. This is about a deranged fan, and everything in it could happen, which makes it kind of scarier than some of these other things. Don't Miss Misery. That was just wonderful. Well, all of these are, right? I mean, how can I put together a top 10 and say, well, this one's okay? These are all fantastic. You can't miss. Let's look at number 4, another prison movie. This was a novella published in 1982, also included in the book Different Seasons, and it was titled the novella is titled Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, and the film is just titled The Shawshank Redemption. And here's Frank Darabont again, another prison movie that's going to be, both of those are, I think, cinches to be in the top 10, The Green Mile and Shawshank. This is at times a brutal prison movie. It's also about, it is about friendship. It's about redemption. It's in the title. Second chances, things like that. And also what happens when evil people are in control of institutions and have all the power. Again, other than prison horror, this isn't a horror movie, but it's just a great story, and it was turned into a great film. The ending of this film is so satisfying for me on so many levels. And listen, I usually steer clear of Tim Robbins. I've made that point before, but I always have time for this film. One of my favorites of all time. I don't regret shunning Tim Robbins when I saw him in the luxury box line at MSG. I stand by that. Next, we have number 3, Salem's Lot. Salem's Lot was a TV movie, made for television movie, that was presented as a miniseries. And there's also a 112-minute movie version of it, non-miniseries version, movie version. I had only seen that. I had never seen the longer one, the 183-minute version, so that's what I just watched. I just watched that last week, and it's fantastic. Now, Salem's Lot is about vampires setting up shop in a small New England town. The head vampire is not a Count Dracula, Bela Lugosi, Christopher Lee, Frank Langella, that sophisticated count. Mr. Barlow's more of the Nosferatu kind of hissing kind of guy with the pointy ears and the nasty teeth and the long fingers, that kind of vampire. And I kind of prefer those. Now his assistant, Mr. Barlow's assistant, is played by James Mason, who is one of my all-time favorites. His voice is just so amazing. One of the great voices of film history. And when he says, Mr. Barlow, you just like your skin crawls. He could say your last name. It doesn't matter what your last name is. Get James Mason to, well, he's gone now, but if James Mason said your name like that, in that way, it would sound really, really evil. Because this was a TV miniseries, you're going to notice some things when you watch it. There's not a lot of gore. It was on TV, and it was on TV in 1979. You're also going to notice some segues. And those are where the commercial breaks were. And you might notice that the soundtrack's a little TV movie-ish, and that's because it was a TV movie. So they can't be faulted for those items because it was a TV movie. Let's move on to number 2. Number 2 was from the film from 1980, the novel in 1977, and this is Stephen King's classic. Let's take a look into room 237. It's The Shining. And it's really funny. Stephen King doesn't like this movie. He once called it a fancy car without an engine. In 1980, when it came out, most reviewers didn't like it. Received middling reviews at best. King fans initially thought that director Stanley Kubrick ruined the book. Stanley Kubrick ruining something, making a bad movie. I don't know. Kubrick is legendary. And now The Shining. So go figure. King doesn't like it. Kubrick, meh. And people thought that Kubrick did a bad job and everything. And now it's considered one of the best horror movies ever made. So it's got a conflicted kind of legacy. Very highly regarded by fans, and yet some fans do not like the movie, or they weren't expecting Stanley Kubrick's version of it. The stories from production on this are infamous. Some fans don't like this movie because of Shelley Duvall's performance. And The Shining is about an author, Jack Torrance, played by Jack Nicholson, who agrees to be a caretaker during the winter at this Colorado hotel, The Overlook. And he and his wife and his son, Danny, are the only ones there during the winter, the harsh winter, the brutal winter. And that's where he starts to lose his mind and slowly descend into madness. And it's a great story. And I think the movie is tremendous. I really like it. But a lot of film fans don't like the movie because of Shelley Duvall's performance, because she's just looks like she's lost her mind. And you read things about the production of this film and you say maybe she wasn't acting. She was like tortured on set. This production, Kubrick even told the crew, don't talk to her, don't interact with her. She was losing her hair. She lost tons of weight and she's skinny to begin with. She, to this day, would say that she was psychologically scarred by making this movie. So some of that really makes its way through the camera. I mean, it's hard to watch some of it when you think of that. Some of the imagery in this film, extremely frightening. You've got the elevator filled with blood. We've got the Danny riding the big wheel down the hallway and running into those creepy twins. You got the decomposing woman in the bathtub. You got Roger the dog man. This is some nasty stuff. Wild, wild stuff. All courtesy of Stephen King. And in this case, Stanley Kubrick in The Shining, which leaves one more to go. And that one, and this is kind of cheating because there are two movies, but it's only one source material, and that is It. You talk about children in peril, this is your story. It was made in 2017, and It Chapter 2 came out 2 years later, and basically the two movies together tell the story of the one book. And this is, as I mentioned, children are in peril, but they are in peril because of Pennywise the clown. And I am scared to death of clowns. So this one is especially creepy and scary for me. Every time Pennywise shows up, I get like this shiver. I hate red balloons now. Every time I go for a walk, I avoid looking in the storm drains because I'm thinking that Pennywise is going to be down there and he's going to have a balloon for me and he's going to offer, hey, Dave, come down here. We all float down here. Yeah, Pennywise. Come on. This is just terrifying. Perfect. And that's number one on our list of top 10 Stephen King movie adaptations. Watch It, and then watch It Chapter 2, and then sleep with the lights on for a couple of weeks, I would think. That wraps us up for the Halloween special, covering some of Stephen King's best and worst movie adaptations over the years. Now, I obviously love movies, but I love to read as well. And having read all of the source material and then seen all of these movies, I can say that there's one place where I usually land, no matter what the book or the movie is, and I think a lot of people out there agree with me, and that is, very simply put, the book was better. So that's it for now. Keep up with all things Cinema Wellman. Read the blog at cinemawellman.com. Watch us on YouTube, listen on Spotify. Email us up, cinemawellman@gmail.com if you've got any suggestions for upcoming episodes or questions or comments, or maybe your favorite Stephen King movie adaptation. Coming up next is going to be, our next episode is going to be the best made-for-TV movies of all time. So that's going to take us probably back to the 70s. So get ready for that. And until then, take care.